It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we're going to look at UFC 300. We're going to look at the competition to UFC. We're going to look at the fighters, and we're going to look at the landscape as it sits right now. With UFC 300 having come and gone, no big antitrust lawsuit is happening this week because, they settled and all that. Now seems like a really good time for us to go over the current status as well as the future outlook for the UFC and the MMA industry as a whole. So we're going to get started with the UFC and UFC 300 because as we record this on Sunday, April 14th, the day after UFC, we figured this is the most appropriate time. So John, I'm going to start off by asking how you saw the event. What would you rate the event?
It was, I can't undersell it. It was pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. It was pretty good in the words of Larry David.
Yes, it was.
It was. I watched the entire card. There was a few moments of distraction when stuff was going around because I couldn't pay full attention. But overall, I thought it was an incredibly entertaining. I will say this is maybe I'm just a little different, or just I guess the mood I was in at the time. But I love the Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje fight. But when he knocked him out while everybody else was going nuts, I went nuts for a split second. But when he went down, I was so nervous about him. Mm-hmm. I did not have the reaction I don't think anybody else had. I saw that, they showed Rogan, they showed Luke Thomas had a thing about his reaction. I didn't have that reaction because as much as I found the fight exciting, I was seriously worried about him the way he went down.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. If you had to rate it, what would you rate it? I thought it was pretty close to perfect. I have never given a card a 10, but I would definitely give that a 9.5.
On a scale of 1 to 10, it was an 11.
Really?
Yeah, well, it's a little okay. One thing, there's kind of a cliche about MMA and boxing, mm-hmm. that boxing has great fights because they generally can last longer, the 12 mm-hmm. rounds, and they're more dramatic, and there's a bigger story involved. And MMA has great events, mm-hmm. and the Gaethje Holloway fight was pretty close to a great fight. Right. It was pretty close up there, not up there with the premier greatest fights ever, though that finish was just nuts. But it was a very entertaining fight, a great fight. But as an event, as MMA does, UFC events, this was one of the greatest events because there was something entertaining almost every fight. Mm-hmm. And that's almost unheard of. It's that's almost unheard of to have the Jim Miller Green fight be that. I thought for sure that was gonna be fight of the night, and then it got beat like 2 or 3 times before the card was over.
Yeah.
There was several the finishes got more nuts. The Holloway finish, the Alex Pereira finish at the end, his knockout was crazy. Mm-hmm. The only down thing to the whole card was probably the co-main because she won, and they didn't stop the fight, and we had to go through the rest of that damn fight after mm-hmm. that. So That was the only down point I would say really on the card.
I have to agree with you as far as the event as a whole and the bookings themselves. 11, easy. The only reason why I deducted a half a point was one single booking, and that was the main event booking. Just the booking, not the fight itself. The fight itself was amazing. Just the booking, because it didn't seem like 00 material to headline basically their biggest card ever.
Yeah,
so
I think
that's the only reason why I deducted a half a point.
Otherwise, I thought the card was amazing top mm-hmm. to bottom when you put it. But I think what hurt it in a lot of the casual fans' point of view, and I'll be intrigued to see if they ever release the pay-per-view buys, because I have a feeling it did great, but not as stellar as people would imagine, mm-hmm. because and actually the undercard might have done just record ratings, but the buys are a little bit lower than the gigantic, well over 1 million buys you'd expect for a 00 event, because the UFC doesn't have UFC 100 is the only one that really had true superstars at their prime at the top in GSP and Brock. 200 brought Brock back, but that was a Brock that already lost. He was, was kind of more of a spectacle at that point.
Yeah.
And 300 was missing that kind of star power, but they're outside of Connor, who they're not going to put on this because he has to split pay-per-views with everybody. And I'm trying to think who else. They don't have that kind of star power right now.
John Jones would be the only other one.
John. I forgot. He was injured now. So,
right.
So that they don't have them available for this card. So, I mean, this is what you get. I guess I'm trying to think who else would be the top of the card. Yeah, there also was not that kind of matchup that everybody was looking forward to, but it's still, I mean, that's kind of nitpicking considering what they did put together. But you kind of expect that kind of that crossover fight for these things, and they didn't have it. I will have one complaint. I saw a lot of people after the event complimenting the UFC, complimenting Dana White, complimenting everybody for putting this event on. But this is maybe just me. I didn't see it, but I didn't see a lot of people complimenting the fighters.
Right.
I mean, from my point of view, they're the people that made this event so damn successful because they gave each other gross bodily harm to entertain us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had one guy actually wave off a foul that happened to him so that he could continue to beat the dog shit out of his opponent. When Alex Pereira grabs Herb Dean's hands and says, no, don't stop this fight.
That was
I'm about to send him to the
badass moves in fighting.
Yeah. I'm about to send him to the land of wind and ghost. You just sit down and mind your business. And that was probably between that and Max pointing to the floor and saying, let's swing it out right here. Those were the two most badass moments I think I've ever seen in any fights.
They're up there. I mean, it's the thing is that Max's was so perfect. It's amazing how overshadowed Pereira's was because of what Max did. So it's not often you get that many viral moments in one card. So,
for sure.
so I guess my overrating is I thought it was you can't put on a better event than that.
Nope. I mean, as far as fights go, as far as the delivery, everything, it was truly a perfect card. I mean, you can't look at UFC 187 and this fight, that fight card, this card, whatever. You can't look at those and compare them to this one because I feel like every single fight had something and they stacked it. We'll never see a card this stacked again. I mean, where are we going to find 12 former or current champions to start that will be able to do this? I just don't see 400 being able to eclipse this one. But
we'll see. We'll see what they pull out of that by that time. But
it felt like if you don't mind, it felt like they rushed production on this, like they waited too long to get the ball rolling to book the card. Too. Hopefully they don't do that with 400 thinking that they have all the time in the world and then they should
announce the fight for 400 tomorrow.
Exactly.
But I think that might have been part of it is that the big fights that they're thinking for this fell through and they couldn't get one. And so they just started putting on whatever fights they could get that were entertaining, relevant, interesting to at least to the bigger UFC fans. But the only thing this fight was missing is in the pre-fight phase and the promotional phase, there wasn't the giant fight that captures the general casual fan interest. That's the only thing missing in the pre-fight. But it's hard to imagine even a great, a big name fight being on this card and being as entertaining as the fights they got. This is the one time all those weirdos always says you can't judge a card until it happens. We're right.
Yeah. But they didn't give us a whole lot to invest in, though, to bring in the casual fan. Did we get a big promotional commercial? We did not. We got the same cookie cutter shit that we get for Apex cards, basically. I mean, the poster itself was barren. I mean, I'm surprised that they had 20,000 people in that arena and that they had an announced $16 million gain.
Yeah, a little. I mean, it was this is a weird thing to say because on one, it was a incredibly stacked card. Mm-hmm. On the other, like I said, MMA and boxing, the fight business is based on these super fights that explode well beyond the interest of normal fights. As someone in the boxing industry told me, sometimes you have 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 being the two people fighting equals 4, 8, and they take on a velocity of their own. and that's what you see with like, Conor McGregor versus Khabib really took off, or, McGregor versus Mayweather, or Mayweather versus Pacquiao. There's certain events that just go off on their own. Canelo Triple G. And I guess the most recent, Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis. And this didn't have that kind of fight, but again, it was, it's hard to, at the same time, I think the idea that it was full of just great fights top to bottom. I mean, I'm sure they said it did over 1 million buys, so pay-per-view buys, and I think it's very likely it will on ESPN. So it did very successfully. It just didn't do that astronomical, escape velocity type that I think a lot of people were kind of hoping for. Expectations might have been a little too high, in other words.
Let's talk about Holloway's knockout over Justin Gaethje, because a while back we saw, I think it was Joaquin Buckley that had this really viral kick. And I mean, it went super viral. And it was, I believe it was knockout of the year for like 2020, 2019, 2021, somewhere in that era. But the point is that you had commented at the time that it was a shame the way that the UFC structure was laid out, because that could have made him a lot of money, but instead it made the UFC a lot of money. We had 2 moments go viral. Pereira right now is still trending in the hundreds of thousands on Twitter by himself, just his name, because of his viral moment. But Holloway's viral moment may have been even more so. How much more is the UFC going to make off of that viral moment than Max will or Alex Pereira will?
Well, I mean, one thing, UFC is showing it on YouTube right now, and it's well over the millions and millions of views. I think like 4 or 5 million views for the Max Holloway. Considering that there's an ad in front of the video clip, so the UFC, that means it's monetized by the UFC. And they generally, a brand like the UFC, a channel like this, probably getting $30 per 1,000 views. So you are talking, what, 5 million? That's fine. So that's, 150 grand they've got so far off that video, which, on the grand scheme of things, not big to the UFC.
But it's less than 24 hours later.
Oh,
We've got months, years to go for that thing to keep accruing.
Yeah, I mean, it's in one way, it's understandable that the UFC benefits, because even in boxing, the fighters, at least they're supposed to be independent contractors. They are hired by the UFC to put on an event. The UFC owns the rights to that event, right? What hurts the fighter now, Max Holloway, is that because the way the systems works in MMA, UFC really benefits from that viral video, because they're selling the brand with it. They get to merchandise it, put in ads, do all this other stuff that sometimes go beyond what, again, we'll compare to boxing, what a boxer would get, that the boxer would have saved, like where you're going to use that. Like you may own the rights for the fight, but you don't own it for like advertising, you can't go to advertising sometimes. So they get to monetize it every which way, and he's locked into a contract. So he can't use he can use the notoriety to get a better deal with the UFC, but not like a boxer could, right? And also he's kind of stuck in the UFC where, like George Kambosos, he has in his contract, it says, he has a contract with Lou DiBella. It says for, about the footage for promotional purposes, his promoter grants the fighter non-exclusive worldwide rights to use clips of up to 3 minutes for, so he can take that clip, a certain amount of it, and if he goes somewhere else, he can use it to market and advertise his next fight or himself, right? So he has some rights to it. And in the higher ranked boxers like Canelo, and I know Nate Diaz did this in his fight with Jake Paul, he owns the footage. And so if they went viral, he would have made all the money himself because he promoted it. But he owns the footage, and so he can use that in future documentaries and future video, put it on YouTube himself and collect the money.
Quick question on that.
Yes.
You had mentioned that UFC fighters per contract can have 3 small clips, right?
Yes.
Okay. What are the odds that Holloway could request that this one be one of those 3 small clips, though?
I'm sure he could request it. It probably could be the 3. Now,
okay.
What can you do? The thing is, the UFC contract was much more limited. You're not allowed if let's say Holloway left the UFC to go fight, Nate Diaz, right? Mm-hmm. The UFC's that doesn't give him permission to put in ads where Kambosos could put it in his own ads or the Showtime. If let's say he went to Showtime's long around, but let's say he went to PBC, Kambosos did. he could take that footage and PBC could run promotions on Amazon using that footage he had. If Holloway leaves UFC, he can't give that to, let's say, PFL or someone else, or even Diaz's Real Fight Promotions, and run promotions ads for it. He has to do that for personal use, and usually it's going to be stuff like it might be, I guess, like on a talk show, he might be able to play it, or when he does an appearance, or if he uses it on his, I guess for personal use, mostly probably on his own website. Right. I don't know. I do not know. The language is a little vague, so I don't know what they would say about someone monetizing it on YouTube. Right. They probably could maybe play it but not monetize it.
What about their own website? If their website sells gear and they're promoting that, that clip.
They could, yeah, he could have it probably on his own website if it's promoting him, if it wasn't tied to something else. I mean, again, the language is somewhat vague. So, but the main thing is they are not going to be able to use that footage to like put it in an ad campaign or promote their fight somewhere else, right? Or sell it as an individual clip or part of a package or something, the best fights of Max Holloway, where, other fighters could. So I guess to get back on track, the UFC is, they made a ton off the fight. They're going to be able to keep this and promote this in the future. It's got huge, the viral nature of it makes the value of their website, YouTube traffic higher. And Max Holloway, he benefits somewhat because his renown is higher. His status as a fighter is higher. He's more well known amongst the public, but it's limited because it's limited basically to his appearance in the UFC. And so he has, it kind of limits his options of what he can do.
The 300,000 bonuses, let's talk about those. We had mentioned them in our little small mini-sode last week, but we got to see them laid out in real time last night. And it was pretty sad because we had so many great finishes and great fights that the UFC had a real opportunity to do something great here and hand out some extra bonuses, but they very notably did not. Tell us about these bonuses, and were they really that big of a deal in the grand scheme of this event?
I mean, in this event, no, I don't think they're going to be that big a deal. We're going to, if we went over the how much they paid all the fighters, we can take an estimate. But I think in the grand scheme, it probably was like 10% of the total purses were these bonuses. The UFC is going to make multiples that revenue, so it's not like the UFC is taking a hit on this. It's for the UFC, it's smart because this was a great big PR boost, right? They got a lot of attention for this, and for the fighters, it's it's like I could see they all get super excited. But look who won it. Mm-hmm. We talked about that on their show. Jiri won it. Gaethje and Max won it, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Gaethje's already said because he's the defending BMF holder. He gets pay-per-view points. So he's going to get several million there. So if we were thinking about like the inequality, we want to spread the money around, and this is like, we want this to be life-changing bonuses for the guys that aren't making as much. Well, Gaethje, it's going to be, 10% of his total purse. So that's not life-changing. Holloway, that's great because he did the most for the card. Like we said, it went viral. He got all this free publicity for the UFC. But for me, it's like, that's because the UFC is built on the idea of like, we have so much power, we set the price. And also we boast that we pay more than we're contractually liable to. And everybody kind of expects the largesse of the UFC to compensate people. I would like to see Gaethje, not Gaethje, but Holloway get much more than that.
Yeah.
I think I would like at least double that. I think honestly, the highest discretionary bonus UFC ever gave that we know about is over $2 million to Conor McGregor. It might have been higher somewhere else, but $2 million. I think Holloway kind of deserves more right here for what he did here tonight. I would love to see him. That if that's the state, if the UFC prides themselves on treating their fighters right, I would love them because they have all the power to give him a special bonus. And maybe some of the other guys that were second place votes for that behind him and some of the other guys, they get the other 300,000 to spread the wealth amongst those that aren't quite as well off.
Holloway wouldn't be in the points, would he? Because he did not have a belt going in. Only title holders can get pay-per-view points, correct? Unless special circumstances, Conor McGregor.
Yeah, Holloway was going to have a conversation with Dan White, he said, because he noticed that they were using his fight with Gaethje as the one that they're promoting for this event, the most promotion. And so he said he was going to speak to him because he thought he deserves to get paid more because we are the fight that's being the one, the one that's getting pushed the most for this card. So, he maybe they gave him points at the end to make up. Maybe they're going to give him a bigger bonus. I don't know. Or maybe they're just saying, hey, this 600,000 that there you're covered.
Last thing on these 300,000 bonuses, I just need to know, were you expecting maybe extra bonuses to be handed out as you watched the card?
Honestly, no. I thought as soon as they announced him to 300,000, we're going to get the 4 bonuses and that's it. I mean, I thought, I was hoping there'd be more, but no, I was pretty sure as soon as they announced 100,000, it would just be those 4.
All right. So hopefully I don't butcher this name, but did you expect a shout out to Ludwig von Mises?
Yes. No, but it does go a long way to explaining why MMA fighters make so little.
Explain.
Because, if you don't know who he is, and I know a little bit about him, but I'm not delved deep into his work. In fact, I was a little confused because he said read Ludwig von Mises and what he said, and the 6 lessons of the Australian School of Economics, I think it was, or something like that.
Who said this?
What's that?
Who said that?
Well, that's what Moicano said during his speech. That was his thing, and I'm not familiar with the 6 lessons. I have never read that. I've never seen that anywhere. So I don't know where you got the 6 lessons. I saw a paper that by someone else during the pandemic about the 6 lessons of Australian School of Economics during the pandemic. And I wonder if he meant that or something else, but I'm not familiar with an actual 6 lessons. But anyways, Ludwig, he's a Ukrainian economist, actually moved to Austria after World War I. And that's why he's part of what's called the Austrian School of Economics, where, basically there's not an actual school, just a bunch of Austrians were there arguing with Germans, and they called theirs they were later called the Austrian School of Economics. And the Austrian School of Economics is a heterodox, which means it's outside the norm. It's honestly, it's looked down on a lot by economists now because a lot of its stuff's been kind of proven wrong. But anyways, that's the guy he called out. The other famous member of the Austrian school, for people listening, is Hayek, Frederick Hayek. People might know that name. Post World War II, he was also a major figure. He's a little better than Ludwig. But, maybe at some time in the future, we could do a whole episode on like the economic principles how it applies to the UFC and how, like I always say, how the UFC is a microcosm of economics.
Yeah.
But the big thing is Ludwig von Mises, the Austrian school, it's one of the 3 components or one of the 3 major influences in what we call neoliberalism, right? The school. So, and neoliberalism is the idea that we want to overturn the New Deal. And it's a kind of a more laissez-faire or, less regulated economy. They don't believe in the gold. They want to go back to the gold standard. I mean, just a lot of stuff that doesn't hold up to scrutiny, but you can see why it's popular with a certain type of person. And apparently he's one of those people. So I was surprised to hear the name, but not surprised because it's the kind of insanity you kind of expect from an MMA fighter, because Ludwig von Mises, he founded the Mises Institute, which is absolutely insane. That place, absolutely insane. And they, their theory is based on proxology, which is, it's all based on human actions are purposeful. I give them credit. It's not homo economicus, but and you can do stuff by logic, but they don't use empirical evidence. And so it's like, you can't test your theories half the time. So again, it's but I mean, a few good things came from them. The subjective theory of value and marginal utilities, things like that. So I'll give credit on a few things, but generally it's a nonsense.
Well, listen,
school of economics.
At least he's reading economy books rather than whatever the heck the one kid's doing, the flat earther kid. What's his name?
Oh, the kid from Arkansas.
Yes, that drilled his nuts.
Bryce Mitchell.
Yeah, the one that caught the drill in his nuts.
Yes. Yeah, that's okay. That is better.
Yeah,
is better,
this is a
but
lot better than what Bryce Mitchell's peddling with his flat earth theories and things like that.
Yeah, what gets me kind of, and this is just on a tangent, what gets me are the people that are big fans of the Austrian School of Economics is they don't want any government regulation. And, if you listen to Hayek, and I think there's some truth, is they're always worried about, that, if we print too much, we'll have we're worried about bubbles. We don't want the economy to get too out. We'll have a bubble. Yet these are the guys that get super excited for bubble economics. These are the guys that jump 2 feet into the housing bubble and bought several homes. These are the guys that jumped into Bitcoin now that it's inflated. These are the guys that jump in the stock market. And again, I don't want to cast aspersions on some of these guys, but some of these people, but it seems to be a certain type of guy that thinks he's a genius because he bought something during a bubble on its way up, thinking that he's a genius at picking it, not realizing that it's going to burst eventually, and he will no longer be that genius.
Oh, okay. These are the guys that read Nietzsche and think that they're immediate philosophers.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Okay.
These are the guys that heard about, that heard about these names a few months ago and are now our experts.
Exactly. All right. How do you think that UFC 300 compared to UFC 100 and UFC 200?
Well, business-wise, I think, you think the trend line would say that 300 did a lot more business, but actually, I don't think so, and I'll say why in a second. But 300, we know a couple things. We know that the gate was 16.5 million, according to Dana White and the Sports Business Journal, who told them. And we know the pay-per-views on ESPN we're supposed to do over 1 million, right? The gate's interesting because our friend Fred P. Garvin Real on Twitter, that maniac who has apparently awesome, his hobby is going through gates. When tickets go on sales, look at the layout of what tickets are available and what the price is, then he can total up what the total gate's going to be. Well, the UFC gate, if it was sold out, should have been somewhere between 22 and 24 million. But it was packed, and it only had a gate of 16.5 million. I have a theory. I can't prove it. My theory is if you look at all the celebrities there, is that the ownership, TKO Endeavor, they gave a lot of comps to celebrities to get them there. And so they used up a lot of the prime real estate for ticket prices for celebrities, and that's why the gate's a little lower than you expect. But and then the pay-per-view, even though it's a little million, the ESPN deal is basically almost a flat, so they got only $20 million only for ESPN. But, they have some great events, ESPN's happy, and then they have a bunch of terrible selling events, and they still get $20 million per pay-per-view. But compared to UFC 100, you look at it, 100 did about 39 million in revenue. 200 at 55.3. I'm guessing 300 did a little more than 200, but maybe not. The expenses, though, for 100, the expenses outside the fighter costs for only 5 million, more than doubled for 200 because they spent a ton on marketing, 12.8. 300, I bet you it comes in similar to 200. More than 100, probably less than 200. I don't remember them spending that much. I mean, the poster they got it from a stock house, the flag, and just changed the color. So they didn't spend that much there. But the gate's gone up from 5 million to 12 to 16. So everything kind of went up a little bit. Now, fighter costs are interesting because in UFC 100, they spent about 10 million on the fighters. At UFC 200, they spent 19.9 million on the fighters. And I'm looking at that roster. I am
Brock
thinking
Lesnar.
Yes. Brock Lesnar got 8 million alone. And then on top of that, Anderson Silva got like 4.5 million. And then both pay-per-view points for both Miesha Tate and Daniel Cormier. Now, some of the guys here at pay-per-view points, a lot of the fighters got paid much above the average. But I don't think there was a Brock Lesnar. So I am betting that the fighter costs are not much higher than they were at 100.
I have a quick question for you.
Go ahead.
Regarding gate. Would it be because UFC 100 and 200 were both held during International Fight Week that the gate was probably better?
Well, the gate for 300 was better than 100 and 200.
Oh, okay. But it just
because ticket prices have gone way up. Gate for 100 was 5.1. Gate for 200 was like 12 million. And so 300 it's gone up
But
to 16.5.
if you were to adjust for inflation and everything like that, would there be much of an adjustment there?
Well, no, actually, you're right. If you adjust for inflation, the gate between 200 and actually the gate for 200 was just under 11 million. My mistake. I misremembered. But if you adjust for inflation, the gate for 200 is very similar, like 13.5, 14 million, which is just, a little bit less than gate for 300.
What about 100? Because and they had a buy rate of 1.6 million.
Well, that's what they report on. I don't know why they report that on Wikipedia, because we know the actual number.
Okay.
The actual pay-per-view buys for 100 was 1.298 million. Yeah, so we got that from the court documents and from also the lender stuff that the UFC had out. So we know that's much less, and we know for UFC 200 it did just over $1 million.
Okay, but as far as gate for 100 for adjustment for inflation, what would you figure that might be?
It'd be about 8.5 million.
Wow, so it had a small gate.
But back then it was a huge gate for the UFC.
Yeah, and it wasn't at T-Mobile, right?
No, T-Mobile hadn't been built yet, so it was at the old.
It was at MGM Grand, wasn't
Grand,
it?
yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't even hold that much.
Yeah, you got to remember, UFC gates only really took off around between Conor and then also the pandemic. Afterwards, the gates have just exploded. Before that, the gates, remember they used to be dwarfed by boxing. Just dwarfed. The UFC for some reason didn't sell nearly the gates as other as boxers, and even Pride when they came to the US was outselling someone or doing as good as well as the UFC on their gates.
Well, what was UFC business itself looking like those years that we had UFC 100 and 200?
Well, this gets kind of interesting because the business of the UFC has exploded over the time since UFC 100 to now. In UFC 2009, the year that they did UFC 100, they did $329 million in total revenue. 7 years later, in 2016, for 200, it was up to $702 million in revenue for that year. We'll use last year because that's the only year we have a full year. But for UFC in 2023, 7 years later, $1.292 billion. So it more than doubled from 100 to 200 revenue, and then almost doubled again from 2016 to 2023. Now, this is also interesting. That's their revenue. Their earnings, EBITDA, has skyrocketed too. UFC in 2009, the year they did UFC 100, they did $129 million in EBITDA. EBITDA, of course, is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. In 2016, their EBITDA was $202 million. In 2023, their EBITDA was $756 million adjusted EBITDA. So EBITDA went up, almost doubled from 2009 to 2016, and then almost quadrupled from 2016 to 2023. Here's what's interesting. If you look at the EBITDA on revenue and their total expenses, the expenses for 2009 were $200 million. They then skyrocketed to $500 million for 2016, and then went up to $537 million in 2023.
So it stayed almost the same from
2016 to 2023. UFC's total expenses went up only $37 million, but their total revenue, went up almost $600 million, and their EBITDA, their earnings, went up $550 million.
Insane.
If we look at fighter expenses too, we see that the fighter costs went up from $59 million in 2009. This is total cost, the bout fight and the all the benefits. In 2016, it was $154 million. So in 2009, fighter costs were 17.9% of revenue, $59 million. 2016, it was 21.9% of revenue, $154 million. And then we estimate last year, 2023, it was $192 million, 14.9% revenue. So what's interesting is that little bit that expenses went up, that is what looks like it went to fighters, right? But none of their other costs went up. But the rest of the $600 million in additional revenue all went to their earnings.
Oh, man.
Oh, and here's one other interesting stat. Ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay, if you look at the total number of fights per year they did, right? I should say the average fighter pay, the mean fighter pay on their total fighter expense based on the number of fights. In 2009, the fighters averaged $99,000. That was the average, not the median average, the mean. So you take the lowest and the highest, so it's going to be skewed because you're the highest guys. So 99,000. 2016 fighter pay on average, the cost per fighter was 156,000, and we estimate last year was 185,000.
So
right?
it barely changed.
Not only did it barely change, if we adjust for inflation, the 2016 number of 156,000 should have been $198,000. So it did not keep up with inflation. Meanwhile, if we adjust for inflation for EBITDA, right, the $202 million in EBITDA that they had in 2016 would have been about $250 million. It was triple that in 2023.
Wow. Man, they just making money hand over fist. So what do you think UFC will look like when we get to UFC 400, which should be in 2032 if we run the schedules the way we're running them now? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!